Om, the Chandogya Upanishad in simple English, presented by Svayam Prakash Sharma, part 10 of 14. This part contains sections 11 to 24 of chapter 5 and concludes the chapter. It also contains sections 1 to 4 of chapter 6. Here, five great householders and the sage Uddalaka Aruni go to the wise and learned King Ashvapati Kekayi to learn about Brahm, the universal self, and also Shvetaketu begins his learning from his father. The Upanishad, chapter 5, sections 11 to 24. These five people, Upamanyu, Satyagya, Indradyum, Janam, and Budil, all of them were great householders of their time. They were also very well versed in the ancient sacred teachings. They got together to investigate the individual self, the Jivatma, and the universal soul, Brahm or the Paramatma. They discussed among themselves and decided that they would go to sage Uddalaka Aruni, who was at that time studying Brahm, the universal self, for further instruction. They therefore went over to the sage. Seeing these five great householders coming, Uddalaka Aruni thought, all these persons are great householders who are all very well versed in the ancient sacred teachings. They are bound to ask me difficult questions which I may not be able to answer, which would be very embarrassing for me. Rather than suffer this embarrassment, it is best that I send them to another teacher. He therefore said to them, Venerable sirs, I know that at present the wise king Ashvapati Kekayi, who is an expert in Brahma knowledge, is studying this Brahma. He would be the best person to teach us. Let us all therefore go to him and learn from him. Then all of them went to King Ashvapati. The king received each of them with due and proper respect and ceremony. Then the next morning, when they had risen, he said to them, In my kingdom there is no thief, there is no miser, there is no drunkard, there is no man without sacrificial fire, there is no ignorant person, there is no adulterer, much less an adulteress. Venerable sirs, I am going to perform a sacrifice, and in that sacrifice, as much wealth as I give to the Ritvik priests who perform the sacrifice, the same amount of wealth I will give to each one of you. So please stay for the sacrifice. Then they all said to him, Sir, it is only fair that we tell you the purpose of our visit. We have come to learn about Brahm from you. Sir, please teach us. Ashvapati said, Tomorrow I will tell you about Brahm, the universal self. The next morning, all six of them went to the king with sacrificial fuel in their hands as a token that they approached him as pupils. Impressed with their humility and without formally initiating them as pupils, the king began his discourse on the universal self. He began by first asking each of them what their concept of the universal self was, and he then built on that. He first asked Upamanyu, On what do you meditate as the self? To which Upamanyu replied, I meditate on heaven only, great king. To him the king said, The self you meditate on is the universal self called the good light. Because of this, you see the Sut, Prasut, and the Asut offering of Som in your family. You eat food. You see what is pleasing. In the family of such a one who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises eminence in Brahma knowledge. Those born in the family will be devoted to work. However, what you meditate on is only the head of the self. It is only a part of the self and not the complete self. Your head would have fallen off if you had not come to me. He then asked Satyagya, On what do you meditate on as the self, my dear? To which Satyagya replied, I meditate on the sun only, great king. To him the king said, The self you meditate on is the universal self called the universal form, because of which There will always be much and many kinds of wealth in your family. This wealth could be in the form of chariots with mules, it could be in the form of female servants, it could be in the form of gold necklaces. You eat food, you see what is pleasing in the family of him who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises Brahma knowledge. However, what you meditate on is the eye of the self, and you would have become blind if you had not come to me. Then he asked Indradyumna, on what do you meditate on as the self? Indradyumna replied, I meditate only on air, wise king. To him Ashvapati said, the self you meditate on is the universal self of varied paths, because of which offerings come to you in different and various ways, and rows of chariots follow you in various ways. You eat food, you see what is pleasing. He eats food, he sees what is pleasing. In the family of one who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises eminence in Brahma knowledge. However, what you meditate on is only the breath of the self, he said, and your breath would have departed if you had not come to me. Then he asked Janam, on what do you meditate on as the self? To which Janam replied, I meditate only on space, wise king. The king commented, the self you meditate on is the universal self called full, because of which you are full of offspring and wealth. You eat food, you see what is pleasing. He eats food, he sees what is pleasing. In the family of such a one who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises eminence in Brahma knowledge. However, what you meditate on is only the body of the self, and your body would have fallen off if you had not come to me. Then he asked Budil, on what do you meditate on as the self? To which Budil replied, I meditate only on water, wise king. To him the king said, the self you meditate on is the universal self called wealth or Rai, because of which you are endowed with wealth and with strength of body. You eat food, you see what is pleasing. He eats food, he sees what is pleasing. In the family of one who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises eminence in Brahma knowledge. However, what you meditate on is only the bladder of the self, and your bladder would have burst if you had not come to me. Finally, he asked Uddalaka Aruni, O Gautam, on what do you meditate on as the self? Gautam replied, I meditate only on the earth, O king. The king then said to him, the self you meditate on, O Gautam, is the universal self called Pratishtha, which is support, because of which you are well supported with offspring and cattle. You see food, you see what is pleasing. He eats food, he sees what is pleasing. In the family of such a one who meditates on the universal self as such, there arises eminence in Brahma knowledge. However, what you meditate on is only the feet of the self, and your feet would have withered away if you had not come to me. Then the king said to all of them, all of you eat your food, knowing Brahm, knowing this universal self as if it were many. He, however, who meditates on Brahm as the measure of a span or as being identical to the self, he eats food in all the worlds, he is in all beings, and he is in all the selves. Of this Brahm, of this universal self, the head is the good light, the eye is the universal form, the breath is the air of various and different parts, the body is the full, the bladder is wealth, the feet are the earth, the chest is the sacrificial area, the hair is the sacred grass, the heart is the Gadapatya fire, the householder's fire, the mind is the Anvaharya Pachan fire, the southern fire, and the mouth is the Ahavanya fire, the eastern fire. Therefore, that food which may come first should be an offering. The first offering is offered to the pran breath. It should be offered saying, Hail to the pran breath. With this, the pran breath is satisfied. When pran breath is satisfied, then the I is satisfied. And when the I is satisfied, then the sun is satisfied. And when the sun is satisfied, then the heaven is satisfied. And when heaven is satisfied, then all that is under heaven and under the sun is satisfied. Along with the satisfaction of all these, he himself becomes satisfied with offspring, with cattle, with food, and with health born of food, with brightness and with eminence in sacred knowledge. The second offering is offered to the Vyan breath. It should be offered saying, Hail to the Vyan breath. Then the Vyan breath is satisfied. And when Vyan breath is satisfied, then the ear is satisfied. And when the ear is satisfied, then the moon is satisfied. And when the moon is satisfied, the quarters are satisfied. And when the quarters are satisfied, all that is under the quarters and under the moon is satisfied. And along with the satisfaction of all these, he himself becomes satisfied with offspring, with cattle, with food, with brightness, and with eminence in sacred knowledge. The third offering is offered to the Apan breath. It should be offered saying, Hail to the Apan breath, which is then satisfied. And when Apan breath is satisfied, then speech is satisfied. And when speech is satisfied, then fire is satisfied. And when the fire is satisfied, then the earth is satisfied. And when the earth is satisfied, then all that is under the earth and under the fire is satisfied. And along with the satisfaction of all these, he himself becomes satisfied with offspring, with cattle, with food, with brightness, and with eminence in sacred knowledge. The fourth offering is offered to the Saman breath. It should be offered saying, Hail to the Saman breath, which is then satisfied. When Saman breath is satisfied, the mind is satisfied. And when the mind is satisfied, the rain god is satisfied. And when the rain god is satisfied, then lightning is satisfied. And when lightning is satisfied, then all that is under lightning and the rain god is satisfied. And along with the satisfaction of all these, he himself becomes satisfied with offspring, with cattle, with food, with brightness, and with eminence in sacred knowledge. The fifth and final offering is offered to the Udan breath. It should be offered saying, Hail to the Udan breath, on which the Udan breath is satisfied. When the Udan breath is satisfied, then the skin is satisfied. And when the skin is satisfied, then the air is satisfied. And when the air is satisfied, then space is satisfied. And when space is satisfied, then all that is under space and air is satisfied. And along with the satisfaction of all these, he himself becomes satisfied with offspring, with cattle, with food, with brightness, and with the eminence in sacred knowledge. If one offers the fire sacrifice without knowing this, then it would be as if he has removed the live coals and he has poured the offering on the dead ashes. Such offering would be useless and futile. But if one offers the fire sacrifice knowing it as such, he then actually offers it in all the worlds. He offers it in all the beings. He offers it in all the selves, and he will perform the sacrifices with a full knowledge of their meaning as well as their purpose. And just as the soft fibers of the Isika reed are totally burnt when laid on a fire, in the same way all the evils of a person are totally burnt up who offers the fire sacrifice knowing it as such, and who performs it with full knowledge of its meaning and its purpose. Therefore, when one has attained the knowledge that the one self dwells in all, that the one self dwells in each and every one, then no restrictions remain for him. And then, even if he were to offer the leftovers of his food to a chandal or to one who does not deserve it, it would still be as if he had actually offered it in his universal self. Since the universal self, since Brahm, would be dwelling in the body of the chandal or the other person too. On this, there is the following verse. Just as hungry children sit expectantly around their mother, In the same way, all beings sit around the fire sacrifice. Yes, all beings in the same way sit around the fire sacrifice. This concludes chapter 5. Now we come to chapter 6, sections 1 to 4. Shvetaketu was the son of Arun. His father said to him, "Go, live the life of a religious student and learn the Vedas and sacred wisdom, my dear, as there is no one in our family who has not learned the Vedas and who is a Brahmin only by birth." In keeping with his father's wishes, Shvetaketu became a religious student at the age of 12 and returned when he was 24 years of age, after having studied all the Vedas. He was full of conceit and arrogance, thinking himself well read. His father then said to him, "Shvetaketu, I see that you are very conceited and arrogant, thinking yourself well read. But are you actually well read? Let me ask you a question. Did you ask your teachers for that instruction by which the unhearable becomes the heard, by which the unperceivable becomes perceived, and by which the unknowable becomes known?" "How can there be such teaching, venerable sir?" Shvetaketu asked his father. His father replied, "My son, know this, that all things made from clay, from gold or iron, are just clay, gold or iron. Their different shapes are just changes to that very clay, to that very gold, or to that very iron, which gives rise to their different names on account of speech. But the truth is that they are just clay, they are just gold, or they are just iron. So if we know a lump of clay, if we know then we know all the changes and modifications to this clay. They are just names arising from speech. It remains clay all the time. So too is it with a nugget of gold. So too is it with iron. Such, my dear, is the teaching. All learning, my dear, is useless and to no avail unless you know the truth with regard to the self, with regard to the Atma." Then Shvetaketu said, "Those venerable men did not know this, for if they had known about it, why would they have not told it to me? Venerable sir, will you please tell me about this self, about this universal self?" "I will, my son," his father replied. He began, "In the beginning, this universal of name and form, this world of manifestation as we know it, it was just being alone, one only, without a second. Some people, however, say, in the beginning, this was non-being alone, one only, without a second, and from that non-being, being was produced. But, my son, see the flaw in this argument. How could it be like this?" said the father. "How could being be produced from non-being? So it has to be that in the beginning this was being alone, one only, without a second, because it is only from being that other beings could be produced. This being thought, 'May I be many, may I grow forth,' it sent out fire. That fire thought, 'May I be many, may I grow forth,' it sent out water. Therefore, whenever a person grieves or perspires, water is produced from the fire because of the heat. That water thought, 'May I be many, may I grow forth,' it sent out food. Therefore, whenever it rains anywhere, then there is abundant food there, and food for eating is produced from water alone. Now, all living beings have only three origins. First, those born from an egg. Second, those born from living beings. And third, those born from sprouts. That divinity thought, 'I should enter into all these three divinities by means of this living self, and let me then develop names and forms. Let me make each one of these three threefold.' The divinity entered into these three divinities by means of the living self and developed names and forms. It made each of these threefold. And how these three divinities became each of them threefold, that now learn from me, my dear. Whatever red form this fire has, it is the form of heat. Whatever is white is the form of water. Whatever is dark, it is the form of earth. Thus the quality of fire vanishes from fire, the changes being only a name which arises from speech, while the truth is that it is only these three forms. Whatever red form the sun has, it is the form of heat. Whatever is white, it is the form of water, and whatever is dark is the form of earth. Thus vanishes the quality of the sun from the sun, the changes being only a name arising from speech, while the truth is that it is only these three forms. Whatever red form the moon has, it is a form of heat. Whatever is white, it is a form of water. Whatever is dark is a form of the earth. Thus vanishes the quality of the moon from the moon, the changes being only a name arising from speech, while the truth is that it is only these three forms. Whatever red form lightning has, it is a form of heat. Whatever is white is a form of water, and whatever is dark is a form of the earth. Thus vanishes the quality of lightning from lightning, the changes being only a name arising from speech, while the truth is that it is only the three forms. All things are ultimately modifications of pure being. The primal, the primordial being becomes all these three deities: fire, water, and earth. In fact, it was just this that the great householders and great students of sacred wisdom knew when they said in olden times, "No one will now tell us what we have not heard. No one will now tell us what we have not perceived, and no one will now tell us what we have not thought." For from these three forms they came to know everything. They knew that whatever appeared red was of the form of heat, whatever appeared white was of the form of water, and whatever appeared dark was of the form of earth. They knew that whatever appeared unintelligible is a combination of just these three divinities. Now, my dear, hear from me how each of these three divinities, when they reach the human, becomes threefold. This concludes part 10 of 14 of the Chandogya Upanishad. Om Shanti 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 Om.